The morning my brother called to tell me our parents had given him $200,000, I was elbow deep in a broken espresso machine at the back of my cafe, wearing yesterday's jeans and a flannel shirt with a coffee stain I'd stopped caring about 2 weeks ago. He didn't lead with it, he never does. He started with the weather in Scottsdale, asked how business was, made the small talk that our family does when they want something to land softer. And then he said it like it was nothing, like he was telling me about a new car. Mom and Dad helped me out. Put money into the restaurant. 200,000 actually. I set down the wrench. That's great, I said. I'm happy for you. And I hung up, not angrily, just done. I stood in that back room for a while, listening to the refrigerator hum. The espresso machine sat open in front of me, all its guts exposed. I'd learned to fix it myself, because I couldn't afford to keep calling the repair service. $35 every time, and I'd already had a slow month. $200,000, and not a single phone call to ask if I needed anything. Let me go back. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio. My parents immigrated from South Korea before I was born, built their lives here from nothing, and they are genuinely the hardest working people I have ever known. My mother worked doubles at the dry cleaners for years. My father drove for a courier company until his back gave out. They sacrificed things I don't even fully know about, and I love them for it. I want to say that clearly because the rest of this story is complicated and I don't want to lose that part in the middle of everything else. But growing up, there was always a difference in how they saw my brother and me. My brother, I'll call him by his relationship to me because his name doesn't matter here, is 5 years older. He's charming. He always was. The kind of person who fills a room without trying, who makes my mother laugh just by walking in the door. When we were kids, my parents called him the responsible one. When he got B's, they celebrated. When I got A's, my mother would say, "Good, good," and ask if I'd eaten. It wasn't cruelty. I want to be fair. They weren't trying to make me feel small. It was more like he was the story they understood. He fit the shape of what they had hoped for. And I was something else. Something they didn't quite know what to do with. I left Columbus at 22 with a culinary arts certificate, a 10-year-old Honda, and about $4,000 I'd saved from waitressing. I moved to Asheville, North Carolina. I don't fully know why Asheville. I'd visited once, during a road trip with a friend from school, and something about the mountains, and the weird little art galleries, and the way the whole city smelled like coffee and cedar just made me feel like I could breathe. Like there was space there for something that didn't fit a mold. My parents did not understand the move. My mother called me every Sunday for the first year and asked when I was coming home. My father asked if Asheville had real opportunities. My brother thought it was a phase. Everyone was very polite about not saying what they actually thought, which was, "This is a mistake and you are going to fail, and we don't know why you're doing this to yourself." I found a job at a bakery first, then a restaurant, then a coffee shop, where I eventually became the manager. I learned every part of the business I could. The ordering, the scheduling, the profit margins, the vendor relationships. I lived in a studio apartment with one window and made do. I was happy in a quiet, private way that I didn't share much with my family, because I knew they wouldn't quite see it the way I did. At 27, the coffee shop I managed closed. The owner retired. She called me into her office, apologized, and then, out of nowhere, offered to sell me the equipment and the lease for a fraction of what it was worth. She said I was the best person she'd ever trusted with her business, and she wanted it to go somewhere good. I said yes before she finished the sentence. I called my parents that night. I was so excited I could barely form sentences. I told them I was going to open my own place, a small cafe, nothing fancy, right there in the River Arts District. I had some savings. I'd talked to a small business lender. I had a plan. My father was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Is this wise? You don't have business experience? You're still so young." My mother said, "What if it doesn't work?" My brother, who was on the call too for some reason I still don't understand, said, "Have you thought about just finding a better job instead?" I told them I had thought about it. I told them I believed in it. I asked, and I hate that I asked, but I did. If there was any way they could help, even a little, maybe 10,000, just to help with the initial build-out, I would pay it back. I had a repayment timeline. My father said they didn't have that kind of money to spare. I said okay. I said I understood. I said I'd figure it out. I figured it out. I opened Hollow and Grounds 18 months later. The name came from the hollow in the mountains I could see from the back window and the obvious coffee pun I couldn't resist. It was small, 12 tables, a long wooden counter I'd helped build myself with a carpenter friend, a chalkboard menu that I updated by hand every morning. I did almost everything in the first year. I was there at 5 in the morning and sometimes still there at 9 at night. My hands were always dry from washing them so often. I went through 3 pairs of shoes in 8 months. It didn't make me rich, but it made money. Consistently, from the first full quarter. My parents came to visit once, about 6 months after I opened. My mother looked around and said it was very cute. My father asked if the neighborhood was safe. They stayed for 2 days, were polite, and a little distant, and flew home. My mother sent a text afterward that said she was proud of me but worried I was working too hard. That was the last time I had a visit from them for almost 2 years. Meanwhile, my brother had decided to open a restaurant in Scottsdale. He'd been in finance for years, hated it, and had always talked about food. He's genuinely a good cook, better than me in some ways. He wanted to open a proper sit-down place. Upscale. White tablecloths, a curated cocktail menu, a chef he'd convinced to come on board who'd worked in actual fine dining. It was a real vision. I don't want to take that away from him. My parents gave him $200,000. No conversation about, is this wise? No, what if it doesn't work? No suggestions to just find a better job instead. They put in $200,000, and my father flew out to Scottsdale to see the space, and my mother told everyone at their church about it. I found out from my brother's phone call. Not from my parents. They never mentioned it to me. I thought about calling them. I drafted the conversation in my head about 100 times, standing at the sink or driving to the farmer's market at 6 in the morning to meet my egg supplier. I imagined saying clearly and calmly, "It hurt that you didn't tell me. It hurt that you said no to me and yes to him without a second thought." But here's the thing. I didn't call them. Because I knew, I'd known for a long time, that the conversation wouldn't go the way I needed it to go. My father would get defensive. My mother would cry and say she didn't understand why I was so upset, that they just wanted what was best for everyone. My brother would somehow end up being the peacemaker, and I would end up feeling like the difficult one for bringing it up. So I went quiet instead. I answered texts when they sent them. I called on birthdays and holidays, but the long Sunday calls stopped. The updates about my business stopped. I kept a polite, surface-level relationship, and I grieved the one I'd wanted in the corners of my life, where I didn't have to explain it to anyone. 6 months passed like that. Then a year. It was my employee, my first full-time hire, a woman named Frances who'd been with me since month 3, who finally said something. She knew my family situation in the way that a person who works 40 hours a week beside you inevitably does. One morning she looked at me over the pastry case and said, "You know you can be sad and also not do anything about it. Those aren't the same thing." I didn't say anything back, but I thought about it for weeks. What I realized, eventually, was that I wasn't sad anymore in the way I had been. The initial sting, that specific breathtaking hurt of realizing your parents measured your worth differently than your siblings, that had moved somewhere, not gone, just changed shape. It had become something quieter, harder, more settled into the walls of who I was. I was building something real. Every week the numbers told me so. I'd added 2 employees, expanded the menu, started a small weekend brunch that had a wait list by the 3rd month. A local food blogger had written about us, and the piece was kind and accurate and made me cry in my car before I went inside to open up. I was making a life. Mine. Entirely mine. And I no longer needed them to see it, to know it was true. My brother's restaurant opened in the spring. I saw the photos on social media. It looked beautiful, genuinely. The space was dramatic, all dark wood and pendant lighting, the kind of place that photographs well. He sent me a text inviting me to the opening, and I said I had a scheduling conflict and sent a nice gift basket from an Asheville vendor I liked. 3 months after that, I got a call from my mother. She didn't start with small talk this time. "Your brother is having some trouble," she said. "The restaurant, it's not doing well." I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of my flower supplier. I watched a pigeon walk across the asphalt in front of me. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and I meant it. He needs help, she said. Your father and I, we've already given what we can give. We don't have more. But we thought, maybe you've been doing well there, yes? Maybe you could help him. Family helps family. There it was. I sat with the silence for a moment. The pigeon pecked at something near the curb. Mom, I said, when I was starting out, when I asked you and Dad for help, do you remember what you said? She was quiet. You said you didn't have the money, and I understood that. I didn't ask again, I figured it out on my own. I paused. A few months later, you gave him $200,000. That's different, she started. How? I asked. Not angry, just genuinely asking. How is it different? She didn't answer. She said, he's your brother. I said, I know he is, and I love him. But I can't give him money I've spent 3 years building, I'm sorry. She hung up before I did. My father called 2 days later. He was more direct. That's always been his way. He said I was being his way. He said I was being selfish. He said family meant sacrifice. He said he hadn't raised me to turn my back on my brother when things got hard. I told him I wasn't turning my back. I was protecting what I had built. I told him that when I needed them, they hadn't been there, and that I didn't say that to punish anyone, but because it was true and he deserved to hear it. He said, you've always thought you were smarter than everyone else. That one landed. I'll be honest. I sat with the phone against my chest for a while after we got off the call, just breathing. My brother called a week later. This conversation was different. He was quieter, less certain. He said he didn't know about the full details of what my parents had asked of me. He said he was sorry for how things had gone. Not perfectly. There was hedging. There were moments where I could feel him not quite saying things, but it was the most honest conversation we'd had in years. I told him I wasn't able to give him money, but I told him I would talk through his books with him if he wanted. I'd been doing this long enough that I knew where restaurants bleed. I knew the vendor relationships, and the menu costing and the staffing ratios and all the places where a beautiful place can quietly fall apart while the photos still look great. I offered him my knowledge. Freely. No strings. He was surprised. I could hear it. He said, why would you do that? And I said, because you're my brother. That's different from writing a check I can't afford. We talked for 2 hours. I don't know if it saved his restaurant. That wasn't really the point. The point was that I chose how to show up, not in the way my parents decided I should, not in the shape of what they needed from me in that moment, in the way I could actually sustain, in the way that didn't ask me to hollow myself out to prove I was a good daughter, a good sister, a loyal member of a family that had spent years not quite seeing me clearly. My parents and I didn't speak for about 4 months after that. My mother eventually texted me a photo of a sunrise over the river near their house in Columbus, no caption. It was the most her way of reaching that I could have expected. I texted back a photo of the mountain view from my back window. That was us, working our way back. Slowly, imperfectly, in the language we had. My father called on my birthday in October. He said happy birthday. He asked about the cafe. I told him we were considering opening a second location. There was a spot in West Asheville that was interesting. A former flower shop with original tile floors and big south-facing windows. He listened. He asked a few questions. They weren't the right questions exactly, but he was trying. At the end of the call, he said, you've done well. 4 words. I know how small that sounds. I know that for some people, it would mean nothing at all. For me, it was enough. Not because I needed his approval to know what I had built was real. I'd stopped needing that somewhere in the second year, somewhere between the first profitable quarter and the morning I stood in my empty cafe before opening and felt, simply and without drama, that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. It was enough because I could hear in it something shifting. Something that had been locked for a long time, moving. Even a little. I still wake up at 5 most mornings. I still fix things myself when I can. I still love the specific quiet of a cafe before anyone else arrives, the way the light comes through the front windows and turns everything gold for about 15 minutes before the day starts. I didn't build this life to prove something to my family. I built it because it was mine, and because building things with your own hands, in the actual and the figurative sense, is the kind of work that doesn't ask you to be someone else while you're doing it. But I will say this. The morning my father said, those 4 words. I stood at the counter of Hollow and Grounds with my second cup of coffee, and I looked out at the mountains in the distance through the back window, and I thought, I made this. All of it. From $4,000 and a broken espresso machine and a lot of mornings when I wasn't sure. And nobody can give that to me. And nobody can take it away. Not even them. I've thought a lot about what actually happened in this story. Not the money, not the restaurant, not the $200,000, not even the phone call from my mother asking me to bail out the person they'd always chosen over me. Those are just the facts. What actually happened is something quieter and harder to put into words. What happened is that I stopped waiting. For most of my 20s, I was building with one eye on the work and one eye on the door, waiting for my parents to notice, waiting for the call where my father said he understood, waiting for my family to finally see what I was doing for what it was. That waiting cost me something. I don't know exactly what. Energy, maybe. A certain kind of lightness. The ability to just be inside what I was building without measuring it against their silence. The turning point wasn't dramatic. It wasn't one conversation or one moment. It was more like a gradual running out of something. The waiting just ran out. And when it did, I found that the work was still there. The cafe was still there. The mountain view out the back window was still there. None of it had needed their approval to become real. It had been real the whole time. There's something I'd come to understand about cause and effect that has nothing to do with luck or fairness. It's this: the choices you make consistently, over time, in the direction of what you actually believe in. Those choices compound. They build on each other. Every morning I showed up at 5 and fixed what was broken and learned what I didn't know yet. That became the next morning, and the next. My brother made his choices too. A beautiful space, a big vision, and somewhere in between, the wrong vendors, the wrong price point, a staffing structure that bled money quietly until it didn't anymore. Neither of us was handed a destiny. We were handed days. We just used them differently. I don't say that to diminish what he went through. Losing something you built is its own kind of grief, and I know that now in a way I didn't before. But I also know that the same intelligence that could have caught those problems earlier was available to him. He just hadn't been in the habit of asking hard questions about his own work. I had been, because nobody was going to ask them for me. Frances said something to me once that I've never forgotten. She said that being sad and not doing anything about it aren't the same thing. She was right, but I'd add something to that now. Being hurt and still choosing integrity, still offering your brother 2 hours of honest conversation about his books, even when he never advocated for you, that's not weakness. That's the hardest kind of strength, the kind that doesn't need an audience. My parents are not bad people. I want to say that again because I mean it. They are people who loved imperfectly, who measured with a flawed ruler, who are trying in the slow and sideways way that people try when they don't quite know how to say they were wrong. My father's 4 words on my birthday, "You've done well," landed the way they did not because I needed them to validate me, but because I could hear in them that something had shifted. That's not nothing, that's actually everything given who he is. What I'd want anyone watching this to take from it is simple. Not easy, simple. The work you do in the direction of what you actually believe in is never wasted, even when nobody sees it. Especially when nobody sees it. Your integrity compounds the same way your skills do. And the people who couldn't see your value when it was inconvenient for them to do so. Sometimes, if you give it enough time and enough honesty, they come around. Not always, but sometimes. And by then, you won't need them to. You'll just be glad they did.